Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Thursday in the Hub. This week, I'm joined by the fabulous Aleksandra Popovski. I first connected with her through the EVE mentoring program, that's Equal Voices in ELT, which she's a big part of. She's also IATEFL Vice President. She's a materials writer, she's a teacher trainer, and she's running a course at the moment on visual arts in ELT. So she's kindly come along to chat to us today about unleashing the power of graphic novels in language learning. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Aleksandra.
Thanks, Teresa. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm really, really happy to be here and to be able to talk about something that I really, really love, and that's graphic novels. Yeah, let's start and see what this thing is all about, because it seems that a lot of CLT professionals, we do know about graphic novels and we do read them. However, it is a problem, it is an issue if we want to use them in our teaching, because it is a very specific literary format. So that's why I like talking about graphic novels, because I want to show my colleagues, fellow teachers, that we can actually learn a lot as teachers from graphic novels, but also that our students, our learners, can learn a lot of the English language. So one thing that I clearly remember, even before I started reading graphic novels and literature on graphic novels, is something that comes from a movie. So in this movie, sorry, my computer is being all funny. Okay, and I don't like that. Hold on, here we go. There's a conversation between a mother and a son, and she asks him about his cartoon story. And he needs to correct her and tell her that it's not a cartoon story, it's a graphic novel. And this basically explains the perception of graphic novels. A lot of people see graphic novels as just some comics. They don't really see value, any kind of value in graphic novels. So I kind of like to prove them wrong. So what is a graphic novel? There are a couple of definitions that I like to use when I do webinars on graphic novels. And very often one name pops up and they call that person kind of a father of graphic novels. However, Will Eisner did not coin the term graphic novel. And this comes as a surprise to a lot of ELT professionals and those who like reading graphic novels. Actually, Richard Kyle, who was a journalist in the 1950s and 60s, is the one who came up with this term graphic novel. He wrote an article back in 1964 on the future of comics, and that's when he referred to comic books or graphic novels. Now, how is Will Eisner connected to graphic novels? Well, Will Eisner did coin the term sequential art. So we have a sequence of images and text, but it is basically anything that uses panels to tell a story. And Will Eisner actually did not know how to pull, let's say, the format of his new work, A Contract with God and Other Tenement Stories, back in 1978. So the term graphic novel is something that he used and it became popular. And that's how graphic novel as a term started to be used back then, and we use it even today. Now, Gretchen Schwartz refers to graphic novels, okay, as pictures, comics in book format. And what is important here is that she refers to fiction and non-fiction. This is interesting because very often we think of graphic novels only as a fiction graphic novels, but actually they can be non-fiction as well. Now, as I said, not a lot of people see graphic novels as serious literature. However, graphic novels are serious literature. And why? It's because just like any traditional piece of literature, okay, where authors basically choose their words very carefully, a graphic novelist doesn't only choose words very carefully, but a graphic novelist needs to think about colors and lines and shapes and forms and lots of other details. So it's a very complex process of actually writing and drawing a graphic novel. So when we think about a story that is told through a graphic novel, it is as interesting, as engaging, as complex as any other story. So that's what a graphic novel is. It's a very serious book. It's also not a genre. Sometimes we think of it as a genre, but a graphic novel is actually a literary format of its own. So, what are some of the drawbacks of graphic novels? I'm going to start with the negatives so that I can show you how positive graphic novels can actually be. And because I'm all about positivity and being optimistic about everything. So the first thing that comes to mind is that graphic novels are not considered to be serious literature. They're considered to be quite childish. So when we see someone reading a graphic novel, okay, you would probably see someone who's like 12, 13, 14, and then you would see me, someone who is much older than that, also reading a graphic novel. So I wouldn't say that graphic novels are childish. They're also perceived as something that has no educational value. And as I said at the beginning, I like to prove people wrong because they do have great educational value. They're only read by struggling readers, so students, learners who have problems reading. So teachers usually give them comics and graphic novels because they think they're easier for them to read. That there are a lot of sensitive topics, such as race, for example, gender identity, sexual orientation, even violence in graphic novels. So parents and teachers are very concerned about these topics and the access that their children and students have to these topics. Also, availability. Not everyone can have access to graphic novels, especially not schools, because we all know that schools struggle when it comes to budgets and finding finances to cover all the expenses. Some say that there is a lack of linguistic challenge, that they are too simple, that the language is too simple, and that students, readers of graphic novels, lose their imagination. So as I said, first, the negative aspects, the drawbacks, but now let's take a look at the benefits of graphic novels. There are a lot of benefits. However, I'll just kind of focus on the most important ones. So the first benefit of graphic novels is that they are very, very engaging. They are often more engaging than those traditional reading materials, especially for learners who struggle with reading, or they have a very limited or no interest at all in traditional literature. Because the combination of images and text can actually help them to read something in a different way. And this makes reading more fun and more interesting for learners. Graphic novels also relate to subjects across curriculum. So you can actually teach biology, chemistry, even math through graphic novels. Especially, I'm surprised when I see teachers, science teachers, to use graphic novels to teach their subject, because I'm not a science person. I never was, not even at school. So I think this is an excellent approach to teaching science. Also, history is one subject that goes perfectly with graphic novels, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. They're also culturally relevant because graphic novels often have very popular characters. We all know superheroes. And then there are themes that are very relevant to different cultural backgrounds and interests. And this can actually motivate learners to read more, to engage more with these graphic novels. And graphic novels in this way can promote cross-cultural understandings. Graphic novels actually do contain literary elements that we can find in traditional novels, and I'll mention them a little bit later. They are linguistically appropriate reading material because as a teacher who wants to use graphic novels in their teaching, you cannot just choose just any graphic novel. You really need to go through it, analyze it, and see if it fits your context. We always talk about the reduction of cognitive load when it comes to graphic novels because we have a lot of visual support. Now, I'm a visual person, so I like to see things to remember them, and graphic novels are perfect for me. But they have this perfect balance of visual support, meaning images, and text. So in this way, we actually understand something better than by just reading a whole paragraph, for example. This visual support can also improve comprehension and retention of language. You know how we always say that when we teach new vocabulary, especially to our young learners and very young learners, it is good to use lots of visual support like flashcards. So graphic novels are basically vocabulary flashcards. Also, we have a multimodal approach to writing and to reading. So because we have different modes of representation in graphic novels, right? We have images and we have text, but also we activate multiple senses when we read graphic novels. So again, this leads to better comprehension, to better understanding, and retention of new language. There is great flexibility in graphic novels because they can be adapted to different levels. So even if you have a graphic novel that is at a higher linguistic level, you can actually simplify the language through activities that you do in connection to that graphic novel, for example. It's flexible. Graphic novels are flexible because they are perfect for readers who do not have great reading habits. So we can use them to improve their reading habits. And they're perfect, of course, for those avid readers that we might have in our classes. There are graphic novels for different ages. So you can always find something that is appropriate for your students who are at different grade level, but also at of different age. Of course, we always connect graphic novels to visual literacy skills, and these new literacy skills are very important. And it's because we need to understand that traditional literacies are no longer enough for our learners. Graphic novels are excellent for honing inference skills, but also critical thinking, because readers, learners, they need to analyze lots of information. There is lots of scaffolding, and there is also lots of building meaning, constructing meaning based on images and text. So I mentioned that we can no longer rely on traditional literacies, and I completely agree with BITS, because the new generations, they need to be comfortable with multiple literacies. So that's why comics or graphic novels could have and should have a place in our classrooms. So that's something about the benefits of graphic novels. Now, when it comes to how we go about using graphic novels in language teaching, not just English language teaching, well, there are some basic rules. And this comes from a wonderful, wonderful book, Using Graphic Novels in the English Language Arts Classroom, that was published in 2020. It's by Borman Cornell and Kim. And the first rule is that everyone needs to have access to the text. As I said before, this might be a problem because especially public state schools, they don't have the funds to buy enough copies for all students at the school. So what we can do is we can go to our local library. And I'm really happy to see that lots of public libraries now have a section with graphic novels for different ages and on different topics and even different levels. So you need to teach students how to read graphic novels. So it's not the same as reading a traditional piece of literature, let's say, traditional novel. So you really need to teach them how to follow the text. And I'll show you an example of that as well. So you need to teach them how to read again. You need to explain to your students that they need to pay attention to both images and text. So it's not just about the images and it's not just about the text, it's about both. So they need to pay attention to both images and text. When we discuss a certain topic based on a certain graphic novel, we need to constantly remind our students that they can support their arguments with text, with images, and the intersection of the two. Because as I always say, it's not just reading the text and supporting our arguments based on that piece of text, but it's also supporting our arguments by providing visual support from a graphic novel. So you explain something, you support your argument by showing a certain image from a graphic novel. Remember when I mentioned that one of the drawbacks is that, learners, we readers of graphic novels, that we lose our imagination, and that's not true. So something that we call gutter, so that's the little space, small space, narrow space between two panels, between two squares. That's what is gutter. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the story develops in our mind. That's where we connect the previous panel and the next panel, the one after that. So that's where the magic happens. So there is no way you can lose your imagination by reading graphic novels. Actually, you can be more creative. You can come up with better ideas. You can come up with better stories and explanations. So there is no loss of imagination if you read graphic novels. So I also mentioned the literary devices, they are actually there in graphic novels, but you need to consider them in terms of text and image. So it's not just the text, it's the images that you have as well. Facial expressions, body language, that's also something that makes you think, that makes you create new meanings, new understandings, because they allow you to have different interpretations. So this is where cultural communication and understanding come into play, because I might interpret a certain facial expression in one way, but you might interpret it in a different way. And that's where you can have a really nice discussion, okay, of different cultural aspects of a certain graphic novel or a character or a scene. Rereading. So my daughter is currently reading a huge novel of about 500 pages for her one of her language classes. And her teacher actually wants them to go back, reread a certain part, and then they discuss it again. And my daughter just hates it, because in 500 pages, she really cannot remember where that particular detail is. And it's very difficult to reread 500 pages. But if you have a graphic novel, then rereading is much easier. So we can always go back to a certain page and we can look at the text, we can look at the images, and we can discover additional details. So instead of rereading 500 pages, you reread maybe, let me see how many pages. This one has about 250, but since it's a graphic novel, okay, when it comes to text, maybe it's about half of that. Graphic novels are enjoyable, and students can easily get lost in them. And I always say, let them get lost. So again, there is no loss of imagination. There is only the danger of our students, of our learners, getting lost in all of these wonderful graphic novels. So now, let's talk a little bit about one of the most important elements when writing a graphic novel. That's colors. And colors are so important because they also tell part of the story. So for me, black is something that I can wear every single day, every single moment of my day. I love black. Not wearing black today because I get criticized all the time. Okay, so red today. But black, not only when it comes to clothes, but all other things, represents mystery and elegance, but also death and something that is evil. But it also represents power. So when you see one of those villains, okay, like in superhero movies or in any other movie, they probably wear black, okay, every single day, just like me, but I'm not a villain, I promise. Now, blue, sadness, but also loyalty and intelligence, okay? Or for example, yellow, it's it's a color that shows happiness and hope and concentration. So if you like to procrastinate, for example, maybe you should consider painting your room yellow and have more focus and concentration. Okay. I think that I would really need to then paint my whole house yellow. Okay. Or for example, gray shows something that is conservative and something that is very formal. But if you are young or feeling young or enthusiastic, okay, or creative, then orange is your color. So colors are extremely important. So let me show you what I mean by this. So these are 2 pages from a wonderful, wonderful graphic novel, Kindred. It's actually based on a novel by Olivia Butler. And if you look at these 2 pages, okay, you will notice that we have different colors, right? So if I ask you which panels, which images, which colors show the past and which show the present, what would you say?
That's fascinating. I mean, my brain automatically goes kind of the first 4 panels of the past with that kind of sepia tone. And I'm not close enough to read what the text is. So yeah, that's just from the color.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, so most would say that, okay. However, those are the present. And those panels, those images with vivid colors, they are actually the ones from the past. Because in the past, the main character is more active. There is lots more going on. There is a lot of pain in the past, and that's all reflected through colors. So the life in the past is more exciting than the life in the present, and the colors actually reflect that. Okay, so another thing that you can do to kind of find out what your learners, or even you, what you think about a certain scene or a page from a graphic novel, you can use a visual thinking routine that is called unveiling stories. And unveiling stories as a routine is perfect for history. So, what is and what do you need to do as a teacher? Well, basically nothing. Okay, so this is a very low prep, okay, activity, and I know that we all love low prep activities. So you show them, okay, let's say just 1 page or 1 panel from a graphic novel, and then you ask them these questions, or maybe not even all of them. You can just choose the ones that you want to focus on. So what is the story? What is the human story behind it? What is the world story? Okay, so the bigger picture. What is the new story, something that we have in the present? And what is the untold story, something that we don't know, something that we cannot see? And it's really interesting to kind of hear your learners discuss these questions, because I'm sure they will all have different perceptions and different stories to tell. That's why we call them unveiling stories. So we unveil things one by one.
And would you do that kind of activity completely with no setting of context before? Just start the lesson with, here's an image, think about these questions. Wow.
Yeah. So it's perfect also for like a cover page. Okay. For example, this is one of my favorite graphic novels, When Stars Are Scattered, and it's about refugees. I'm actually a refugee because I am from Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this story really resonated with me, and I used it quite a lot. So I use it, for example, with the cover page of this graphic novel. And although they can see the title, okay, it doesn't say a lot because it's only When Stars Are Scattered. You know, some might say it's a love story without really knowing how serious this graphic novel is. So yeah, and then you can use it. Let's say you've started reading and analyzing this graphic novel, and then you can do this again with another part of the graphic novel, and you can see whether their perceptions, their opinions, their thinking, whether they have changed. So that's quite interesting, because I like to kind of recycle these routines or other strategies, because I want to see where my students are at the beginning, the middle, and then the end. And I want to see that change in their thinking. So this is, I think, perfect. So you can use it at the beginning, in the middle, and then the end again. Now, what's the story is also another activity that we can do with graphic novels. This is not something new. However, it is new in terms of which graphic novel you are currently, let's say, reading with your students, and which part of that graphic novel you want to focus on, and a topic that you want to focus on. This activity encourages students to analyze a narrative, but it also encourages them to express their imagination and their creativity with a very small amount of text. That does not mean that the linguistic level is low. It means that even, when they say, well, they're not linguistically challenging, well, actually they are, because you don't have a lot of text to work with. And as a graphic novelist, you don't have a lot of words to work with to actually write. So you really have to choose those words carefully, because you want them to tell this story together with the images. This particular part of this graphic novel, this is Anya's Ghost by Vera Brosgol, focuses on, this graphic novel focuses on gender stereotypes, on conflict and tolerance and identity and immigrants as well. So you can discuss all of these topics with different activities, and this one as well. So just so you know that for educational purposes, and I checked this, you are legally allowed to make a copy, a scan of 2 pages, but you always have to, of course, right, say where they come from. So yeah, just kind of a tip so you don't get into trouble. So you kind of blank out, okay, all of these speech and thought bubbles, and you ask your students to look at the panel and come up with the text. So after you've given them about maybe, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, depends on the level, depends on graphic novel that you're doing with them, they share their answers, and then you give them the original. It's a very simple activity, but it works really, really well. Why? Because I can also ask my students to use particular vocabulary, so something that I want them to revise and recycle, maybe grammar structures that I want them to revise, okay? So sometimes this can even be used before a test, if you are one of those teachers who give tests. I don't. So you can ask them, to write, to use present simple and present continuous, or the first conditional, second, reported speech, etc. So it's not just vocabulary, it's also grammar, and then of course any other language point that you want to include. So if you think that you cannot work with graphic novels, that it's difficult to start, okay, it's not. Because there are some generic questions that you can use, okay, to exploit a graphic novel. And these are also suggested in the book that I referred to at the beginning. So how did you feel when you saw a certain image or read words on this and that page? And I especially like the first part of the question. How did you feel? So we don't ask our students often enough how they feel. And I think That's something that we need to improve in our teaching. So how did you feel? What did you think? Sometimes we don't even ask that, what do you think about this? We just kind of, go through the motions when we teach something. So what did you think when you saw or read? What personal experience influenced how you felt or thought as you did? So we have that personal touch. Okay, so we really want them to connect what they read, what they saw, okay, with their own personal experience. What specific aspects of the text caused you to feel or think as you did? But here I would also add what image or images caused you to feel or think as you did. Okay, then we have a question again connected to images. So if you already formed a hypothesis about an image that you saw, what assumptions, what preconceptions is your hypothesis based upon? Of course, this question is for students who are at a higher linguistic level, let's say. However, you can also simplify it and use it with lower levels. So as I said, it's not so difficult to start working with graphic novels when you have this kind of support. Now, there is another thing that you can do. There are a lot of teachers, a lot of people who like wordless comics and wordless graphic novels. And that's quite interesting because everything is based on your own personal interpretation of images. Now, there is also another thinking routine that I kind of adapted for graphic novels and comics. So it's looking, instead of 10, I say 5 times 5 times 5. So what you need to do here is you look at the image, okay, that I give you for at least 30 seconds. So observation is very important here. So you need to give them time to look at something. So let your eyes wander, okay, to different parts of this image. Then you list 5 nouns, 5 adjectives, and 5 verbs about any aspect of that picture, of that image, of that panel. Then you pair up, you work with your partner, and you share your words, okay? Then you agree on a joint, and I have a mistake, agree on a joint list of 5 nouns, 5 adjectives, and 5 verbs. Okay, the teacher and me always, keeping an eye on this. And then you can use these words, and you can, of course, modify them to write a story or a poem about that image. So I don't actually give them to write the words that, for example, a character is saying in that particular panel, but I like them to kind of expand, okay? So there is writing here as well. So this is an excellent example of a wordless comic book or graphic novel. This is The Arrival by Sean Pan. And this story is about a young man who is actually an immigrant. So he leaves his family to start a new life in another country. So what is very interesting about this particular graphic novel is this, the colors, okay, and the way the author designed the panels. So there are 3 very important flashbacks in this graphic novel, and these flashbacks are actually all in gray. And also, if you see this very crumbly texture of these frames, it also means this is something that happened before in the past. So you give your students this, they have time to look at all of these small images on one page on these panels, and then they come up with 5 verbs, 5 adjectives, 5 nouns, pair up, create a joint list, and then write their own story or a poem based on this. This is also a good example, okay, of the layout. So here we have one image per panel, because sometimes you have more, they kind of group them together in one panel to tell a particular, I don't know, event, let's say, to describe it. But here, one person, one thing per panel. Now, when I talk about graphic novels, okay, I get all excited because I think that they are wonderful, and it's a shame that we don't use them often in our teaching. But of course, there are things that we need to consider before we start using them. And first of all, it's how accessible they are to our students and to us teachers and to our schools. But I think that they're worth trying, okay? So I think that even if you cannot have access to a whole graphic novel, let's say, you can, okay, choose, select pages and panels from different graphic novels and use them in your teaching, in your classroom with your students. So if you want to learn more about graphic novels, you can always get in touch. I do have a course on visual arts in ELT, and we deal not only with graphic novels, but we also focus on like street art and photography, etc. I think that maybe after this webinar, okay, I think that maybe you will consider using graphic novels in your teaching, or maybe you already are using graphic novels. So it would be lovely to read some of your comments after this webinar. So I hope I didn't bore you to death. So I would like to thank you for being here today with me, and thank you, Teresa, again for your invitation. And by the way, this is me, okay? I used to do a whole project on graphic novels here where I live in North Macedonia. And one of my course participants actually drew me. So now I have a comic, okay, character. This is a comic Alex, or a graphic novel Alex. So thank you very much again. And yeah, just write some comments, ask me questions, get in touch. Okay, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So awesome. Thank you.
I've learned so much, like the gutter, that was a completely new term to me, and I think you're so right about that being where people can use their imaginations and think about what's not in the text, what's not in the images. Yeah. So that was really cool. Yeah. I have a couple of questions. You talked about the availability. Do you prefer using paper copies, or would you get your students to use digital versions as well?
See, I think you can guess what I would say. Okay, so I'll just give you this one and as an example. This is manga Shakespeare. Okay, manga is a different format, let's say, but I also kind of like using them with my students. So I bought all 8 of them, and I was in London last year, and they're pretty heavy, all 8 of them together. And I dragged them all the way home with me because I like the smell, you know, of paper, and I like just how the pages feel. And also, I think that even for my students, it's better and it's more interesting and more engaging if they can actually touch, you know, a certain book. And what I do is I ask them also to kind of draw with their fingers over certain parts, okay, of a panel, over images, etc. So yeah, paper definitely for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. And also thinking about length, because I had always imagined graphic novels being similar to comic books and, you know, being fairly thin, but you mentioned kind of 250 pages.
Oh,
And
yes.
do you
Yeah.
find,
So, yeah.
students are a bit kind of, oh, I don't want to read all this?
Yeah. So, this is Kindred, Octavia E. Butler's adaptation into graphic novel. And this one looks really, really big. But of course, as I said, because we can be very flexible, we can always select a graphic novel that is shorter, okay, has fewer pages. So, for example, Anya's Ghost has about 180, but one of my students actually read the whole graphic novel in about 30 minutes, because when you look at it, there isn't a lot of text, okay, maybe here on some pages, but not all of them. So see, so it's mostly panels, images that you can see. So as I said, you really need to be very careful when you start introducing graphic novels. You don't want to overwhelm your students. But what we did in this project, that Graphic Novels 101, is because we had weekly sessions with our course participants, what my friend and I did, we kind of split the graphic novels that we worked on into different sections. So they had reading assignments from this page to that page, and then that's how we did it. So we broke them kind of up into smaller parts,
Mhm.
and that makes
And
it easier.
thinking about as well what you just said about how you might have a page where there's not much text. Obviously, the images contain a lot of the information. Do you talk about that when you teach the students how to
Yeah,
read a graphic
yeah,
novel?
yes, exactly. So, okay, so let me show you one example of that, because we mentioned reading a graphic novel. So I would, for example, um, hold on, let me find a page in this one. So I would usually pick up a graphic novel and show them how to read a graphic novel. So, the usual thing that we would do is we start from the left and then go like this, right? Okay. But in some graphic novels and on some pages, it's different. You have this, then this, okay, then this, then this, then this. So you need to explain to them that they need to pay attention to the gutters. They need to pay attention to the flow of the text, whether the text in the previous panel is connected to the text in the one right after that one. So sometimes it's difficult for them to get used to that going back and forth, because they need to learn again how to read. We always talk about teaching our students how to read, letters and words and sentences, but here they need to learn how to read images and text at the same time. So yeah, you really need to teach them how to read. And then you need to explain to them, that there's a speech bubble, but there is also a thought bubble, and what it means, that inner dialogue, etc. So yeah, there are a lot of things that you need to teach them, when you need to teach them how to read again. Okay. And they go like, we need to learn how to read again. Like, we know how to read. And I always tell them, no, you don't. No, you don't. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we haven't had any comments or questions come in on the chat, but as Alex said, if anything crops up, do feel free to tag her or tag me in the video comments, and we'll get back to you. Yeah, I'm convinced. If I was teaching, I would be going out right now to buy some graphic novels and use them with my students. One last question, which has just popped into my head. Genre-wise, you obviously talked about the fact that they cover such a wide range of topics. For someone who's starting out, is there anything that you would recommend as a good starting point?
I would personally recommend actually historical fiction, okay, like Kindred, for example. Okay, I love that one. And if you are interested in different topics, okay, I would definitely recommend biographies. So biographies as graphic novels. I think that we learn a lot about an author. We learn a lot about their struggles or issues that they had. But for me, the most important part of, let's say, a biographical graphic novel is how they explain the process of becoming a graphic novelist, because that's something that is a part of their biographies. So it's quite interesting. And this one is also something that I would highly recommend. It's a comic about gender, fine, and it is an autobiography that takes through this very complex process of identity and how to define your identity and how to accept your own identity. So yeah, definitely biographies, autobiographies, and historical fiction for me. Of course, for our young learners, you can start with just, superheroes. They love them. So, that's something that they enjoy. They know them from movies. So that's a good starting point with our young learners. Yeah, graphic novels about superheroes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for coming along this morning and sharing all your expertise with us and your passion for graphic novels. I'm sure everybody's going to be going away now and getting into the joy of reading graphic novels as well. Everyone have a fabulous week, and I'll see you again for another webinar soon.
Thank you. Bye.